Well, as you can tell, we are going to deal with 3 whole verses tonight in the story of Elijah. But I want to ask this question first. What would cause you to make a major change in life? Whether it's a job change, whether it's a change away from retirement back to something, to gainful employment, whether it was a place away from your current residence.
Necessity.
Necessity? Well, explain what necessity looks like.
If you cannot take care of yourself at home, it becomes necessary to listen to your children and move where you can do that.
Now, okay, so part of it, if it becomes necessary, you can't take care of yourself and becomes necessary to go someplace else. That's one part. The other is it becomes necessary for you to listen to your children. That's the second part. And I have learned very well the last several years that those two do not necessarily go together. And I've already apologized to my kids. Yeah.
It's usually
All right.
external circumstances. My plans are this way, and everything else takes it away.
So, things outside of your control
Absolutely.
that would cause you to have to make a change. Okay?
Personal choice, that was in your control, but it's still going to be a major change.
So, what
Marriage,
kinds of things
kids.
would cause you to make the choice
Yeah.
to make a
Right.
change on that?
Personal choices make major changes. When you control the first part.
Yeah? So, it's one thing to think about it, because if you leave it in the hypothetical, it's no big deal. Yeah, I can talk about this, I can imagine this, I can dream about this. But what would convince you to make a change, really? What kinds of things would cause you to choose to make a change to your regular routine, to the things you're familiar with, the things that you're comfortable with?
Health.
Age can.
Needs
Yeah.
some health.
When we get to our story today with Elijah, we're going to look at some changes that take place. Now, do you remember where we last left Elijah? Where did we last leave him? How were things going for Elijah?
Pity party.
Pity party?
Sitting under a tree.
Uh-huh. He was saying, God, just end it now. Just take me home. If this is the way life is going to be, I just want to end it all now. You remember that he's had a lot of just really wonderful experiences. I mean, he started out on Mount Carmel, and God demonstrated his power through what Elijah did. Before that, he had prayed that it would not rain, and it had not rained for 3 years. And so people could see that God was with Elijah, that he was listening to Elijah, that he was working through Elijah. He goes on to Mount Carmel, and people can see very well that God is working with and through Elijah, and his power is very evident. Elijah prays for rain to come, and here comes the rain. And then he, gets his robes and hitches them up in his belt, and he runs ahead of Ahab's chariot and makes it over to Jezreel, which is where Jezebel was at the time, at her summer palace. And but then things go south, don't they? Jezebel decides, she tells Elijah, if you're alive by this time tomorrow, it'll be my own fault. So Elijah takes off. He goes down south. He goes down to Mount Sinai. He wants to go meet with God. He wants to try to figure out what is going on here. I have done everything you asked me to do. I have made all the changes you've asked me to make. I have preached your word to all these people. And it looks like they're going to turn back to God, but then nothing happens. It's just as bad as it was before. And so you remember that God appeared to Elijah. And look at verse 15 of chapter 19, where we left off last time. The Lord said to him, go back the way you came, go to the desert of Damascus. When you get there, anoint Hazael king over Aram. Also anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, king over Israel. and anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, from Abel-Meholah to succeed you as prophet. Jehu will put to death any who escape the sword of Hazael, and Elisha will put to death any who escape the sword of Jehu. And so God tells him, I'm still with you. I still have things for you to do. I'm not finished with you yet. There is still work to do. He tries to redirect Elijah to understand things are not all as bad as you think they are. Things are still in the works. Let me work. Wait on my timing. And then he ends up in verse 18 with this encouragement. Yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal and whose mouths have not kissed him. He says, not only do I have work for you to do, but understand, Elijah, you're not the only one left. There are still people in Israel, as bad as it may seem, with Baal predominantly being worshipped in Israel, there are still people in Israel that have not bowed the knee to Baal. So keep your eyes open. Keep your perspective straight. So, what's Elijah to do? Well, the place that he tells Elijah to go back to is on the other side of the Dead Sea, up to the region of Israel that is on the east side of the Jordan River. And that may become significant as well as we enter into our story. So let's look at these 3 verses. And it's this interaction, this interplay between Elijah and this young guy that comes on the scene named Elisha. And what happens between them, what kind of decisions they make, what kind of changes they start making. So Elijah went from there and found Elisha, son of Shaphat. He was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen, and he himself was driving the 12th pair. Elijah went up to him and threw his cloak around him. Elisha then left his oxen and ran after Elijah. Let me kiss my father and mother goodbye, he said, and then I will come to you. Go back, Elijah replied. What have I done to you? So Elisha left him and went back. He took his yoke of oxen and slaughtered them. He burned the plowing equipment to cook the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he set out to follow Elijah and became a servant. Let's start with Elijah. When Elijah hears God's word, says, go and do this, go and do this, go and do this, I still got this work for you to do, and by the way, not everybody has bowed the knee to Baal. What is Elijah's response? How does he react?
He leaves immediately to do it.
Yeah, he goes. There is no more time for a pity party. There's no more time to self-reflect and to figure out if this is really what he got himself into and this is really what he intends to do. Instead, when God speaks, Elijah gets up and goes. There is no hesitancy, it seems. How do you know? Whenever you've been in a period of time, whenever you've had those times where you're searching for what's real, you're searching for what's important spiritually, you're looking at your own life and doing that self-evaluation. You may even be crying out to God and say, God, is this all there is to it? Is this really what you've called me to in life? I've done what you've asked me to do. I've accomplished the things that I think you wanted me to do, and yet there's nothing that's changing. There's nothing that's different. God, is there more to life than this? What finally causes you to get up and go? What will cause us to get up and go? Is God's word enough to get us to get up and go? Is that who I look for? Is that who I look to? When I've got these questions, when I've got these doubts, when I've got these fears about what the future holds for me, am I willing to go to God? Am I willing to listen to His word and listen to His promises and listen to His instructions, listen to His direction? And then once I understand it, once I read it, do I understand, okay, it's time to get up and act on it? Because that's what Elijah does. It's time to go. Well, let's talk about Elisha a little bit. We read a little bit about him. We have this short little introduction about him. Verse 16, verse 16, it says, anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, king over Israel, anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, from Abel Maholah, to succeed you as prophet. Verse 19, we read that Elijah went from there and found Elisha, son of Shaphat. He was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen, and he himself driving the 12th pair. Okay, so what do we know about Elisha from this description?
He's a farmer.
He's a farmer. He's driving some oxen. What else do we know about him?
Chosen by God.
He's chosen. He's been pinpointed. He's been singled out. Elijah, you go find this guy.
He knows who Elijah is.
Elisha knows who Elijah is.
And Elijah knows who Elisha is. Because it's like, he just comes in, it's like, you put a cloak on him. How do you know you've got the right guy?
How do you think Elisha knew who Elijah was? There doesn't seem to be any conversation here.
A reputation.
Uh-huh. Again, we'll read it later on, but if you go to 2 Kings chapter 1, there's a few verses in there where it describes what Elijah looks like. He's got a very distinct attire. He's the prequel to John the Baptist. He didn't look like anybody else. And so the stories about Elijah have preceded him. Elisha knows who he is because of what he looks like, what he hears, and perhaps the reputation that Elijah has. What else do we know about him?
He's got parents.
He's got parents? Don't we all?
Well, not
He's not
living.
wrong.
But what do we know about his parents? He's rich. He is from a rich family. How do you know that? He's got 12 yoke of oxen. And he's driving the 12th pair. Now, why would he do that? Well, it's customary in that day and time that the farmer's son follows the farmhands with that final yoke of oxen. He's supervising. He's cleaning up after them. He's making sure they're doing their job. And so he's bringing up the rear with his yoke of oxen. So we know he's the son of a wealthy man. He is the son of a wealthy farmer. We also know he's very responsible because he's doing what his father's asked him to do. Okay, what else do you know about him?
He's spiritual,
Why do you think that?
because he heard the call from God and he took it immediately. He knew exactly when he put the cloak on him what it was for and who it was from.
Now you're jumping the gun. You're jumping ahead in the story. You're acting like, Joe back here. But we do get some indication that he's got a spiritual mindset about him. The name Elisha itself means God saves, or God is our salvation. He lives east of the Jordan, which gives us some indication of the area. That's the same area that Elijah came from when you go back and you read about Elijah's background. And there's a good chance then, because he lives east of the Jordan, that Baal's influence, even though it has infiltrated all of Israel, that perhaps east of the Jordan it's not quite as strong as it would be right there at Samaria, right there in the heart of Israel. And so perhaps Elisha has a little bit of a different upbringing, a little bit different background, maybe not quite as surrounded with Baal as if he were right there in the heart of the country. His dad's name, Shaphat, it actually means God judges. So he comes from a family, remember names in that day meant a lot. It kind of not only described the character of a person, but it also shaped the character of a person. And so his dad's got this name that ascribes God with the authority to judge, but then his dad has named his son as one who, his name means God is our salvation, or God saves. He doesn't have a Baal name. He's got a name that honors God. So we know he's got that in his background. So I guess my question is, as you look at Elisha and you think about him and you think about others that God has called, what kind of credentials does it require for a person to be called by God to have a significant place in God's purposes?
None.
None?
A willing heart.
Willingness. There doesn't seem to be any kind of an earthly criteria or a resume that a person has to put together to say, God, here I am, you can use me. Instead, it's just got to be somebody who's willing to be used. That whenever God calls, he's willing to answer. Yeah, here I am. Go ahead, I'll do it. What kind of credentials do you wish you had? And you say, well, if I could do this, or if I had this, or if I was able to do this, then I would do this for God. Have you ever found yourself saying stuff like that? You know, if I could speak publicly like Dale can, then, you know, I'd do it. I'd be used by God by that way. Or if I could lead singing like Dean Mushambagambo, I just like the name, I have to say it as much as I can. If I could lead singing if I could sing like him, then I might get up and I might do that. If I could encourage folks like Jackie Humphrey, then I would be sure to do that. But I just don't see how God can use me.
But we all have different talents.
We do.
We all have different talents, and, I mean, my talent, someone may have a talent of just being there, listening, a listening ear. You don't have to say a word, but that's your talent to do that. You don't have to do anything publicly, I don't think.
Don't you think God knows that?
Yes, absolutely.
But sometimes we act like we know better than God.
Mhm.
God, you didn't give me the talents that I could really use for you.
What's Moses
But
thought?
you use the talent that you talk.
It is what Moses thought. At least that's the excuses he used, wasn't it? God, I can't talk well. How am I supposed to go and do this? Don't you know where I've come from? Don't you know that they're trying to kill me? Don't you know? And so Moses played this don't you know game with God. Don't you know this? Don't you know that? What are some of the excuses that Elisha could have used with God?
His parents needed him.
Yeah, somebody's got to run these oxen.
Mm-hmm.
They can't do it without me. What other excuses might he have used?
He doesn't want to die. I mean,
Why would you think that?
Elijah has been chased this whole time by Ahab, and Elisha is going to follow him. Therefore, he's going to be an accomplice. He may even be chased after himself to try to get killed.
There you go, Burl. Jump ahead in the story too. Yeah, hold on to that thought. That'll come up.
Well, you wouldn't want to admit it, but you're going to be giving up a pretty cushy life.
Oh yeah. He is in line to inherit the farm. And not only is he going to inherit it, but it is set. It is made. We traveled to South Texas this last weekend, and we passed through King Ranch, that area down in there. And you think about the expanse of King Ranch and all the wealth that has accumulated over the years. And you think, what if I was one of the, what if I inherited, what if I was one of the heirs of King Ranch? Or what if I'd been one of the heirs of the 4-6s Ranch back whenever it was going on? I'd had life made. I wouldn't have to worry about anything.
As somebody who has inherited land, the more things I own, the more things own me.
So not only has he got to give up his cushy job, but he's also got to give up the things that have claimed his attention. Yeah, this decision that Elisha has got to make, I mean, we can kind of run through the story and kind of gloss over the story, but Elisha's got a lot of excuses and a lot of reasons to stay put. It's not like he's trying to get out of a bad situation in life. It's not like he's looking for, greener pasture somewhere. He's got the green pastures right where he's at. What would cause him to make a change? Why in the world would he follow Elijah?
You believed.
Well,
You really believed that you do it.
let's see what he does next. Okay, so next thing we read about Elijah doesn't seem to make any word. He just says he went up to him, threw his cloak around him. What's going on? Is Elisha cold? Is he, need something to wrap him up? What's the point? What is the significance of Elijah going up and putting his cloak around Elisha?
It's almost like being anointed.
Like being anointed? It's passing the torch, passing the mantle.
He was replacing him as a prophet.
What Elijah is doing is symbolically coming up to Elisha and saying, I am passing my responsibilities, my role onto you.
Right.
I am offering them to you. See, Elisha's got some choices to make because he can take the cloak off and he can throw it back.
But he didn't.
The same thing comes up, we'll see it later in the story, where this passing of the cloak happens a second time. And it is Elijah's way of telling Elisha, I want you to come with me. I've got a job for you to do. God's got a job for you to do, and he wants you to come alongside and do it. Now, isn't it interesting that in all of this, really, Elijah doesn't explain a whole lot to Elisha. You don't get a lot of conversation where they sit down together and Elisha, I need you to explain. God visited with me and he said, and now maybe they had those conversations. We don't read it. Instead, all we read is Elijah going up, putting his cloak on Elisha, and then he proceeds to go his way. And the understood message that Elisha is to get is, I've got a job for you to do. Come along with me. Come alongside. Does that have any implication or application for us today? How would that apply to us today? Who are you asking to come alongside you?
Supposed to be asking everybody.
Yeah, but even Elijah didn't go to just everybody. You don't see him going up to everybody and say, here's my cloak. Here's my cloak. Has a whole stack of them there on his camel, just starts passing them out. No, he's very selective.
And his baptism is putting on.
Sure. But that's where we come alongside Christ. That's where we come alongside and the Holy Spirit guiding us. But what about those of us in this room? Who are we asking to come alongside so that we can pass a mantle of responsibility that God has given us to that next generation? What is that?
Start with our friends and our family and our kids.
Starts with our family, doesn't it? Where we're asking them to come alongside. In fact, they live with us. They get to see all of it, whether they want to or not. They don't have a lot of a choice to it, do they? Not until they get older. But how do you go up to somebody? How do you go up to somebody and ask them to come alongside? Is that really something that God wants you to do?
It's interesting. If we was going to ask someone, we may pick somebody who's in need, come alongside me, but that was just opposite. I think that would be a bigger deal.
Yeah.
Because we might be more likely to take in someone than to approach someone who is, quote, upper or whatever.
Yeah. Somebody who's different, somebody who has a different background, somebody has a different story than you do.
Another thing is, it doesn't even necessarily have to be someone that is not a believer. Like Elijah went to someone who was already a believer. He was just going to train him to do God's work. So if we do that towards, especially the younger generation, we can begin that training to where they can also use their gifts to then follow and listen to God.
I get this feeling, and I've heard it, I especially heard it as I was younger, because we would have friends of ours who they would say things like, I would love to learn how to, and you just kind of fill in the blank. I'd love to learn hospitality. I would love to learn how to make things to benefit people who are less well off. I'd like to learn how to encourage people. I'd like to learn, and we had talked to him and says, well, how are you going to do that? I said, well, I'd love it if an older person would help me learn those things.
Protege.
Yeah, somebody who they could come alongside. But, you know, they're too busy and they're just not really interested in helping me out with stuff like that. And then I would go listen to folks who were older. You know what they said? You know, I'd really like to help folks out. I'd really like to help some of these younger folks learn some really important skills like how to encourage folks or how to have hospitality, or I'd really like to help them learn how to reach out to people but you know, they're just not really interested in learning that kind of stuff. And I hear these two different groups of people that want the same thing, but they're missing each other. Do we ever allow, I mean, we're busy folks. We have got so many responsibilities, so many activities, so many interests, so many things that we're either involved in, responsible for, or just plain enjoy doing, that we don't really have a lot of time for this kind of a relationship that Elijah and Elisha had with one another. Come alongside, spend time with me, watch me, listen to how I talk to people, watch how I work for God, watch what God does through me, because He's wanting to do the same thing through you. And it takes that relationship time for that to take place. So how many of us use those excuses of busyness to keep us from actually reaching out to somebody and say, hey, come alongside. I want you to learn some things along the way. Now, how do we approach people to do that?
But there's a reverse. You may see that person doing those things and let me come along and help you out. And while you're helping them out, then
Yeah.
you're learning.
Now, we're going to talk about Elijah first, because his job was to go find somebody to bring alongside. I'm putting the emphasis right now on those of us who have something to share. Because God has worked with us, God has used us, God has walked with us, or we've walked with God, and we've learned some things, and I've done some things that have glorified God in my life, and I need to be able to pass that on to other folks. But I allow too many things to get in the way of allowing that to happen.
Well, you don't see too much of that in the church these days, that when someone is doing something, then you want to pass it on to someone else.
That's right.
Because they want to keep on doing it themselves.
We're too busy. We're too preoccupied. We're too distracted.
And people have also become too proud. They won't ask for help.
That's true too.
Mm-hmm. You may want to help, and oh no, I'm okay. I know, because I've done it, and I'm okay. You know, I have somebody that comes and brings me plates or whatever, you know, and I say, oh, okay, well, call me if you ever need anything. Okay, I never hear from them.
So how do we do it?
I don't know how to approach people like that.
How do we bring people
You
alongside?
feel like you're forcing yourself on them, and some people don't like that. You know, they don't like for you to force yourself on them, you know.
So it could be argued that Elijah in some ways pushed himself on Elisha. He took a man. That's
But
what we
he
need to
was
do.
obedient.
We all need to take a cloak, and we all need to wear a cloak. That's it.
Mhm.
And whenever I find somebody, I'll just wrap you.
Can't say no.
That's right. No, that's not it. What are our symbolic ways of inviting people to go alongside?
Just straight up asking.
We got a lot of structure here at Green Lawn for them.
There is some structure for it, isn't there?
And it's not as spontaneous as this,
Right.
but you kind of have to develop relationship. You get them into your class, or you get them in small groups, and next thing you know, they're leading. They're a lot better than me.
So there is one where you put yourself in settings, you put yourself in groups where that takes place,
Absolutely.
where you make yourself available. Good. What else does it look like?
Just asking, like, hey, do you want to follow me? Do you want to learn what I know and allow me to help you? Sometimes that's all it takes.
One is the direct approach.
Yeah.
Say, hey, you know what? I see something in you, and I'd love to share some things I've learned. Can we spend some time together? Can we go talk coffee? I don't do coffee, all right? I used to do Dr. Pepper, and I do every once in a while. Tea. We'll go do iced tea. How about that? And let's talk about this. The direct approach works.
Sandpaper, get the rough edges off.
That's right. Bring it along. Instead of a cloak, we have sandpaper. That works. But what about the indirect approach? When I was in high school, one of the reasons I do what I do is because we had an education minister that came on board with my home church. And he never really came up and said, Dewey, I really think you ought to be doing this and this. No, instead he just came up and said, Dewey, I'd like you to do this with me. And it might be a vacation Bible school thing, or it might be a class with a group of folks. I remember one summer he took a group of us guys and took us to a different part of town there in Dallas, or other side of Dallas, and we did a vacation Bible school for a church there on the other side of Dallas. It was just, hey, I'm going to go do this. Why don't you go with me? Nothing formal, nothing real, I'm going to teach you how to do this. Instead, he saw within us this something that needed to be developed, and he just said, come on with me.
Perhaps the approach is to make that person feel valued.
Yeah.
And when you make a person feel valued, they've got the confidence then, and they want to do that.
Angela, whenever she was that same kind of age, she had a lady there in her home church that taught children's classes. She said, Angela, come teach that class with me. Come and be my helper. And just invited her into the classroom. Mm-hmm. And with that, Angela learned how to teach kids and develop Bible lessons for kids and how to be creative. And it doesn't have to be those kinds of activities. I know that some of our elders have sometimes called somebody and say, hey, I'm going to go visit in the hospital. Would you go with me? And they just bring them along with them. Visit in the hospital. And after a while, what you find is that person starts deciding, you know what, I can do this. This is familiar now. And so they just go on their own to go visit in the hospital. Are there ways that we can invite people to come alongside without feeling like it's got to be some big production? It's just, hey, I'm doing this, come with me. See, the encouragement to you is, when are you going to do it? Some of you are doing it. I know that. Some of you are encouraging folks along the way, and you're helping, you're allowing them to see you do some of these things and to do things with you. I'm encouraging all of us to do that intentionally. Find somebody that you can bring alongside. Here, come do this with me. Let's go do coffee. Let's go.
That's what Mildred Eckstein did to me.
Yeah.
It was her. I never taught a class in my life. And she came up to me and said, I would love you to be my helper.
Yeah.
And it was Mildred that did that. And at Branch and Heritage, we had a lady getting over it. She said, I want you to be I want to be your mentor. And it was a direct approach. And you're kind of flattered in a way. You can't say no. And then you like it.
Elisha had the opportunity to say no. What would make him decide to do something different? Well, notice what he does do. Where'd my Bible go? It's over here. I always lay it down and say, where'd that thing go? So Elijah went up to him, threw his cloak around him. Elisha then left his oxen, ran after Elijah. Let me kiss my father and mother goodbye, he said, and then I will come with you. What do you make of his response, of Elisha's response?
Well, a lot of people will refer to when Jesus was calling people to follow him, and they said, let me go bury my mother and father.
Uh-huh.
And to me, I don't think it's even the same thing. Because it's like, hey, let me say goodbye, which is the responsible thing to do, because it's going to be real quick, since he's just giving them a kiss, saying goodbye. The guy in the during Jesus' time, he was probably going to bury his parents, and they weren't dead yet.
Different context.
Yeah.
In Jesus' case, it's a man who is putting his mother and father, or putting his father before following Jesus. In this case, it appears to be Elisha showing honor to his mom and dad before he leaves. The key thing is, and it's interesting to me, the words that are used here. He says Elisha left his oxen and ran after Elijah.
And then he showed, he did a good thing for the people.
Don't jump ahead yet.
Yeah, I'm the jump ahead.
Hold up. No, I'm gonna let you make that comment when we get there.
We're there.
We're there, that's
We're there
right.
now.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah. No, Elisha shows that he's willing to come along somebody and learn. Now, see, that's the other side of it. Sonia, you mentioned it. Burl, you're a young guy. Are we willing to put ourselves alongside someone and learn from them? See, it is one thing to go up and say, here, come alongside me. But what about going up to somebody and say, I see something I want to learn more about. Can I just follow you for a while? And allowing ourselves to come alongside somebody. To learn a new skill, a new talent, a new way of relating to people. That something that I see in somebody else that I'd really like to be better at. And so I come alongside. So what you all mentioned earlier, it can work both ways. Both the individual who invites somebody to come alongside, but then also the person who comes and says, I really want to learn something from you. Because I want to glorify God just like you do. But again, we're so busy. We're so distracted. Ain't got time for that. And we miss out on so much to do for the kingdom of God because we just don't take the time.
I think the way our story started with Elijah feeling like all was to no avail, and all, made me think of the hymn, and yet I can understand where the words of this hymn would be appropriate. But when there's naught to remain, take me home, Lord, take me home. If I'm useless below, please let me go. And maybe our attitude may be that before God's ready for it to be the end of the story. So young people, I think, would look toward older people, probably out of respect, and would be willing. And I won't go ahead and jump, but we do know what Elisha does. I mean, so he was not like the one that when the man said, let me bury my father,
right,
my mother, because
he's ready to go.
He's ready to go.
And he starts to get ready to go. But then Elijah talks again. Go back, Elijah replied. What have I done to you?
Yeah, go back again.
Okay, does Elijah just can't make up his mind? All right, I want you to go with me. No, get back there.
Well, the way I read it, it's like, go ahead and go back. What am I to stop you? Like, go and honor your parents.
That's not exactly what he says.
Well, that's how it sounds in my head.
I know, but that's not what he says. And this is after, he's run after Elijah. Says, then I'll come with you. And it's, you go back. What have I done to you? What's behind Elijah's words?
He knows how hard the road is.
Elijah's just been through a valley. He's been on the run from Jezebel. Burl, you mentioned it before. All these challenges, all these trials that Elijah's gone through. What Elijah is inviting Elisha to is a life like his. And it's almost as if Elijah just kind of stops and he thinks to himself, oh man, what in the world am I doing to this poor guy? He's got it made. He's got everything he needs. He's got everything anybody could want. And here I'm asking him to leave all of this and to be on the run with me. And possibly put his own life on the line. What have I done to you? I got a question for you. Is it possible to be a Christian without being a disciple?
If you're a disciple, you're a follower.
Uh-huh.
And Jesus has told us that his yoke is easy and the burden is light, if we will believe that.
So, is it possible
Yes.
to be a Christian and not be a disciple?
Because Christian is just a label that humanity has put on the followers of Jesus Christ. So anyone can put that label on themselves. But being a disciple actually takes effort, and you actually have to,
You're a student.
yeah.
Yeah, now understand, as I ask this question, and that's where it's a little bit difficult to be able to ask it without seeing it in writing, because I say, is there a difference between being a Christian disciple, and really what we ought to do is put this word Christian in quotation marks.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is, I mean, Christians today in our present culture are finding it more challenging, more difficult, but when it really comes down to it, it's still a fairly acceptable thing to do, to be a Christian, isn't it? I mean, especially in many communities. I mean, I'm a Christian. And it used to be, you'd have to be one of those in order to do business in that community, you know, because that's what was acceptable. That's what people looked for. See, the question is this: is it possible that we are sometimes it's okay to be a Christian without really taking on the responsibility and the challenges that it takes to be a disciple of Jesus Christ? Yes? You're chomping at the bit back there, I can tell.
Jesus told John, if you're lukewarm, we're going to spit you out.
Yeah. I want to remind us, John chapter, let me get the right spots here. John chapter 15. Jesus is meeting with his disciples. And listen to Jesus' words. John chapter 15. It's page 1011 for those of you who are.
2011, okay.
Yeah.
But aren't like
All
the
of it?
different Bibles different pages anyway?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
It's just a joke.
Jesus says, if the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. If you belonged to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world, but I've chosen you out of the world. That is why the world hates you. John 21. This is where Jesus, calls Peter aside, and he asks him 3 times, do you love me? And in John chapter 21, notice what Jesus says to Peter in verse 18. He says, very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. And then over in Acts chapter 9, I think it's verse 16. You remember what Jesus says to Ananias whenever he's telling Ananias to go and preach to this guy named Saul that's been persecuting the church? A little punchline he adds on there. I need you to go and tell him how much he must suffer for my name. Did anybody Did Jesus ever go to a class about how to win friends and influence people?
No.
Do you notice how many times whenever Jesus calls disciples, he doesn't paint them the rosy picture. He doesn't say, come and find peace, for your soul, and find self-actualization. Come find identity and find, this camaraderie. He doesn't get into all those kinds of things. He says, I want you to come follow me because, by the way, you're going to be persecuted, you're going to be hated, you're going to have to go through all sorts of hardships for my name.
And be honored that you can do it.
And be honored that you can do it, but understand, you got a tough road ahead of you. Why would he do that? Why would Elijah do this to Elisha? It'd been a lot easier to say, Elisha, come on. You're going to be held in esteem. People are going to look up to you because you follow God, and you're going to do all these wonderful things because God's going to work his power in you. And just think of the way that people are going to be amazed whenever they look at you. That is not what Elijah does. He looks at Elisha and says, go home. What in the world am I calling you to?
Being forewarned.
And being very honest about what life of a disciple is about. Do we understand what we've been called to? Do we understand that when we call somebody alongside of us and say, I want you to follow and live with me for a while, follow me a while, develop this relationship because I want to pass on some things that I've been doing to glorify God so that you can glorify God in the same way, but understand it's going to cost you something. Are we honest with people? If you've ever had a Bible study with somebody and wanted them to become a Christian, what did you tell them? Oh, follow Jesus and he'll bring peace to your heart and he'll give meaning to your life and he'll give you purpose and you will have a life that is better than you ever imagined. But were you also honest with them? It's going to require tough decisions on your part. It's going to cause you to have to leave some things behind. It may cause you to have some relationships where people turn against you.
Well, if you paint that rosy picture, like, well, then let's just pray about it and God's going to do this. And don't tell them if it's not God's will, he's not going to. Well, boy, when it doesn't happen, you've lost that person for good. You can't paint that kind of a picture.
I think in the business world we call it bait and switch. Elijah could have very well done the bait and switch with Elisha. Come on, this is going to be an adventure.
A lot of times these days when we become Christian, we don't think we're going to have no hard time.
That's right.
Yeah, we think we're escaping from the hard times.
Yeah, because nobody warned me. Nobody sat down with me and told me, you got to understand, this is what you're being called to.
Because when we have hard times, we think God done forgot about it.
Yeah, I've done something wrong.
There's also the part, at least this is what happens with me personally. Like, hey, I haven't really had any hard times. Am I doing this right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
am I truly following God? Because you're supposed to have troubles because of your following God. You're supposed to be hated by the world. But that's not being true right now. Am I doing the right thing?
God will give it to you at the right time, and if you do it earlier, it's not gonna work out his way.
You're still being prepared.
Yeah. I guess, have we understood that when we've been called to be disciples, that God is calling us to a life that is more like Elijah's than it is at other times? And whenever I'm inviting someone to come alongside, am I being honest with them that this is going to cost you something? This means something. Elijah says, Elisha, I'm sorry, just go on back. I didn't think about it, or you don't understand what you're getting yourself into. Do you think Elisha understood what he was getting himself into?
Well, he went and doubled down, killed all those oxen, and then came back and said, no, I'm ready.
Hey, don't just can't leave the rest of the
Well, before we get there, Elijah did not pick Elisha.
It's true.
He didn't go out and say, hey bud, I think this is something you need to come alongside me and do. God picked Elisha.
Yeah.
And so God sent him to Elisha, and then it was like, okay, I'm gonna go do your will. And then, oh, whoa, wait, poor guy. What did I just do? You know, but God picked Elisha, so it was different.
Yeah, you're right.
From that point of view.
It's a different kind of calling that he gets into
It's
too.
almost, well, it's an apprenticeship.
Yeah.
And when you have an apprentice, they're gonna learn your good and they're gonna learn your bad.
Yeah.
And I think you need to be there to explain to them when the bad times happen, why they happen, and how to avoid them.
And it makes you wonder if Elisha had been praying, what do you want me to do, Lord? I'm ready to do whatever, you know, if you want me to do the oxen, I'm here. If you want me to do something else, I'm there. And so God heard him and said, okay.
It's gotta be more than this farm.
Okay, I don't wanna go too ahead or too behind either, okay?
You'll get in trouble if you do.
That's right.
Yeah,
Get ready to get slammed, go ahead.
Right, okay, maybe I missed something, but did Elisha know who Elijah was though?
Apparently, yes.
So he knew who he was, maybe that's why he followed him. Otherwise, I don't know if he,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, Elisha understands what he's being called to. He's being called as an apprentice to this man of God.
And I think there's that, almost that, allure, if you will, of, you know, I mean, he has some reverence for Elijah, and so he's like, you know, and now Elijah's picking me, you know, this is great, you know, and so kind of this, I'm gonna go follow him, absolutely, but then, yes, Elijah is like, well, you know, what have I really done? You know, I mean, does he really know what he's getting into, as opposed to just,
Does he know what he's getting into, and how in the world could I take him out of this comfort to go into this? Story about these three ministers and their wives. They're having a friendly dinner, when for some reason the subject of martyrdom came up. What would it be like, they wondered aloud, if they were actually called upon to give up their lives for their faith? Would they do it? Two of them agreed that, if only intellectually, they had settled that question in their minds from the beginning. Yes, they would die for Jesus if necessary. Whether they would live up to that commitment, only events would tell. But one of the ministers present declared that he wasn't sure he was there yet. That is, he didn't know if he would be willing to hold on to his belief in Jesus if the threat of death were on him. He'd have to wait and see. At any rate, no, he could not say unequivocally that he would lay down his life for Jesus, at least not at that time. Perhaps this preacher simply had not considered the question before. Have you considered the question? What does it mean to follow Jesus? Is it just being a Christian, or does it mean a disciple? That's what he's asking Elisha to be. And so, Elisha left him. He says, go back. Well, Elisha left him, went back. He took his yoke of oxen and slaughtered them. He burned the plowing equipment to cook the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he set out to follow Elijah and became his servant. He goes, he burns the stuff, he makes a feast, he has a party, and he goes. You've heard it's important not to burn your bridges. You know, you don't want to burn your bridges because you never know when you might need that person back. You know, don't burn your bridges with your employer because you might have to come back. When's it the right time to burn your bridges?
If he would hold
When
you
you
back.
know, when you're for sure, you know. And Elisha apparently knew that he wasn't going back to that life anymore.
So when you know that you're headed this direction,
Exactly.
when you want to make sure it doesn't become a distraction or a reason to turn away and go back.
You're not gonna go back and get rid of
And
it.
it shows
You don't have a
commitment.
choice.
It shows commitment. There are times whenever we need to completely make a clean break from some things that are holding us back so that we can fully and
Undeniable.
yeah, all those words. Follow Jesus.
Jesus calls us to go all in for him.
That's right.
So when we go with all in for him, we have to burn bridges.
I have the cartoon in my office. I'll get to you, Joe. I really will. I have this cartoon in my office, and it shows the preacher and the guy being baptized. They're in the baptistry together, and the preacher says to the guy, says, "Now you know that whenever you go under the water, that everything that you are and everything that you have, everything goes under the water with you, and it all belongs to Jesus from then on." And so he gets ready, he baptizes him, and the next image, it shows the guy's under the water, but he's got his wallet up here. I'm willing to give it up. What am I holding back?
You mentioned John, and that when he was old, that he would be carried about in places he didn't want to go and all. I think it's the early church fathers, the historians, who wrote about John. And this is not recorded in the scripture that I'm aware of, but he was carried about, and he was still encouraging by saying, "Little children, love one another, love one another."
Yeah.
Even
after all the trials he went through,
absolutely.
that's still what he focused on.
I keep coming back to these preachers, and they're not being asked to be executed. They're asked to be having their life filled with Jesus. That's a totally different, they are the same thing and they're not.
Yeah. And when Peter said to Jesus that he would die for him, you know, and then Jesus said, "You will."
Yeah. So just a couple of lessons from Elijah tonight. Number one, have I really understood and taken seriously? I know that we all understand it that well when we first follow Jesus. I'm not sure Elisha understood it all, but he was willing to find out. He was willing to go wherever God took him. Is that the kind of discipleship that I'm following Jesus with? And the second one is look around you. Stop letting distractions, stop letting busyness, stop letting fear to stand in the way of going to somebody and asking them to come alongside and learning from Jesus with you. Because really, that is what God has called us to do with one another in the body of Christ. And so let's keep it going. Let's keep perpetuating it.
That's why it's so important for us to know one another.
Yes, it is. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.